Hey guys, tonight we're going back to January 15th, 2009. A cold Thursday afternoon in New York City. The kind of winter day where your breath fogs in front of you and the air smells clean and sharp. We're going to walk through one of the most documented emergency landings in aviation history. The day US Airways Flight 1549 came down on the Hudson River and every single person aboard walked away alive. This is real history. No dramatization. Just the facts as they were recorded, investigated, and verified by the National Transportation Safety Board and countless eyewitnesses who happened to be looking up at exactly the right moment. Before we begin, I want to invite you to do something. Down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in bed already? On a couch in Tokyo? Walking a dog in Berlin at dawn? I love knowing this story is reaching you wherever you are, whatever your night looks like. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow, and it means more sleep-friendly history coming your way. Maybe hit that like button too. It's a small thing, but it genuinely makes a difference in helping others find these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 3:24 in the afternoon. LaGuardia Airport sits on the northern edge of Queens, right where the East River widens. The airport is busy, as it always is, with departures stacking up in the cold January air. US Airways Flight 1549 is an Airbus A320, registration N106US, a narrow-body jet that's been in service since 1999. It's scheduled for Charlotte Douglas International Airport in North Carolina, a routine flight that thousands of passengers take every week. There are 150 passengers aboard. 5 crew members. The captain is Chesley Sullenberger, 57 years old, a former Air Force fighter pilot with nearly 40 years of flying experience. The first officer is Jeffrey Skiles, 49, who has logged thousands of hours but is new to the A320. This is actually one of his first flights on this particular aircraft type after transitioning from the Boeing 737. 3 flight attendants complete the crew: Donna Dent, Doreen Welsh, and Sheila Dale. They've been through the safety briefings countless times. They know the emergency procedures by heart, though none of them have ever had to use them in a real crisis. The passengers are ordinary people, business travelers heading to meetings, families visiting relatives, a man traveling with his wife and daughter. A few people who chose this flight simply because it was the next one available. No one aboard has any idea they'll be part of history. The weather is cold but clear. Visibility is good. The kind of day where you can see across the river into Manhattan, where the buildings catch the late afternoon light. The Hudson River itself is calm, its surface dark and glassy, reflecting the winter sky. At 3:24 and 54 seconds p.m., Flight 1549 begins its takeoff roll from Runway 4. The engines spool up. The Airbus accelerates down the asphalt. Sullenberger is at the controls for this leg, standard procedure, where pilots alternate who flies each segment. Skiles handles radio communications and monitors the instruments. The aircraft lifts off smoothly. Gear up. Flaps retracted on schedule. Everything is completely normal. The flight is clear to climb to 15,000 feet and proceed on course. In the cabin, passengers settle in. Some open laptops. Others gaze out the windows at New York falling away below them. The Airbus climbs over the Bronx, heading roughly northwest. The George Washington Bridge is visible in the distance. Below, the patterns of streets and buildings spread out in every direction. One of the most densely populated metropolitan areas on Earth. At 3 hours, 27 minutes, and 10 seconds, the aircraft is passing through approximately 2,800 feet. They've been in the air for 2 minutes and 16 seconds. Sullenberger and Skiles are following their climb checklist, preparing for the cruise portion of the flight. And then something happens that changes everything. The aircraft encounters a flock of Canada geese, large birds traveling in formation at exactly the wrong altitude at exactly the wrong moment. The collision is almost instantaneous. Multiple birds strike the aircraft. Some hit the fuselage. Others are ingested directly into both engines. Jet engines are tested to withstand bird strikes, but there are limits. A single bird, even a large one, can usually be handled. But multiple birds into both engines simultaneously. That's a different scenario entirely. The fan blades inside the engines are spinning at enormous speeds, and when organic matter enters at that velocity, the results are catastrophic. Both engines begin to fail. Not gradually, almost immediately. The sound changes. The smooth roar of the turbofans becomes something else, rougher, wrong. Passengers in the back of the aircraft smell something burning. Some hear loud bangs. On the flight deck, warning lights illuminate. The engines aren't producing thrust. Sullenberger and Skiles are suddenly flying a powerless aircraft over one of the most densely populated areas in the United States. The entire event, from bird strike to river landing, will take less than 4 minutes. The bird strike happens at 3:27 and 11 seconds p.m. 1 second, Flight 1549 is a normally functioning aircraft climbing through the New York airspace. The next second, it's a glider with 155 people aboard. Canada geese are substantial birds. An adult can weigh between 8 and 14 pounds. They migrate in large flocks, often flying at altitudes that intersect with aircraft departure and arrival paths. Wildlife management at airports is a constant challenge, and LaGuardia, surrounded by water and parkland, is particularly vulnerable to bird activity. The NTSB investigation would later determine that the aircraft struck a flock of at least 4 birds, possibly more. The impact forces were severe enough to cause immediate damage to both CFM 56-5B4/P turbofan engines. These are reliable engines, used on thousands of A320 aircraft worldwide. They're designed with safety margins. But no engine can sustain multiple large bird ingestions and continue functioning. Within seconds, both engines lose thrust. The normal steady push forward ceases. The aircraft is now descending, and there's no way to restart the engines quickly enough to matter. Sullenberger's hands are on the controls. Skiles is already reaching for checklists, for procedures, for something that might help. The first words from the cockpit are calm. Professional. At 3 hours, 27 minutes, and 15 seconds, just 4 seconds after the strike, Sullenberger radios air traffic control, hit birds. We've lost thrust on both engines. We're turning back towards LaGuardia. The controller, Patrick Hudson, is 25 miles away at the New York Terminal Radar Approach Control Facility in Westbury, Long Island. He's handling multiple aircraft. His scope shows Flight 1549's transponder code, altitude, and heading. What he hears in Sullenberger's voice is concerning but controlled. There's no panic, just information. Hudson immediately clears Flight 1549 to return to LaGuardia. Runway 13 is available. He starts coordinating with other controllers, moving traffic out of the way, creating a clear path. But even as he's doing this, he's watching the altitude readout. The aircraft is descending faster than a normal approach. Much faster. In the cockpit, Sullenberger and Skiles are running through the dual engine failure checklist. This is a procedure they've practiced in simulators, but simulator scenarios usually give you altitude and time. Right now, they have neither. They're at 2,800 feet and dropping. Below them is the most densely populated urban area in the United States. Buildings, streets, millions of people. The Airbus A320 has a glide ratio of approximately 17:1 in optimal conditions. That means for every 17 feet forward, it descends 1 foot. But optimal conditions assume clean configuration, no gear down, no flaps extended unnecessarily. And it assumes the pilots have time to establish the perfect glide speed. Sullenberger is doing the calculations in his head, not with numbers exactly, but with decades of experience. He can feel the aircraft. He knows its performance. He looks at LaGuardia behind them, looks at the rate of descent, and he knows they won't make it. The mathematics of altitude and distance don't work. At 3 hours, 27 minutes, and 24 seconds, Hudson offers runway 13 at LaGuardia. Sullenberger's response is immediate. Unable. One word. Unable. It contains everything. They cannot return to LaGuardia. The altitude is gone. The glide path doesn't reach. Hudson immediately suggests Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, just across the Hudson River. It's closer. Runway 1 is available. It's a smaller airport, but it has a long enough runway for an A320. Controllers are already alerting Teterboro. Emergency vehicles are being positioned. Sullenberger considers it. For a moment, Teterboro might work. But he's looking at the altimeter, watching the vertical speed indicator, feeling the aircraft's descent rate. They're passing through 1,550 feet now. Teterboro is behind them, across the river. To reach it, they'd have to turn, maintain altitude long enough to cross urban New Jersey, then line up with a runway. And if they don't make it, if the glide path falls short, they'll come down in a residential area. Apartment buildings, houses, streets full of people. The thought is unbearable. At 3 hours, 28 minutes and 5 seconds, Sullenberger makes the decision that will define the rest of his life. He keys the radio. We're going to be in the Hudson. His voice is still calm. Matter of fact, he's not asking permission. He's stating what's going to happen. The Hudson River is directly below them, wide and open. It's freezing cold, yes. Water landings, ditching, in aviation terminology, are notoriously dangerous. Aircraft aren't designed to land on water. The forces involved can tear a fuselage apart. But it's the only option that doesn't risk killing people on the ground. Harton acknowledges. He's already thinking about rescue assets. Coast Guard, NYPD harbor units, ferry boats, anything that can get to the river quickly. In the cabin, passengers sense something wrong. The engine noise has changed. Some smell burning. A few notice the aircraft is descending more steeply than normal. The flight attendants, Dent, Welsh, and Dale, are trained to read situations. They see the concern on each other's faces. Then they hear Sullenberger's voice over the PA system. 3 words delivered with absolute clarity. Brace for impact. Not we're experiencing technical difficulties. Not return to your seats. Just brace for impact. The cabin erupts into controlled chaos. Not screaming, not yet, but sudden intense activity. The flight attendants immediately begin shouting instructions. Brace. Brace. Heads down. Stay down. Passengers bend forward, hands behind heads or gripping ankles. Some people pray. Others call loved ones, trying to send final messages, though most calls don't connect in time. A few people are frozen, unable to process what's happening. The flight attendants physically position them, pushing heads down, ensuring everyone is as protected as possible. Outside the windows, passengers can see the river approaching. It's so close now. The surface looks hard from this height, like concrete. The George Washington Bridge passes on their left. Manhattan Towers on the right. The water is coming up fast. Sullenberger is focused entirely on the controls. He needs to keep the nose up. Too steep, and they'll break apart on impact. Too shallow, and they'll skip and cartwheel. The speed needs to be precise. The wings need to stay level. One wing touching first would spin them violently. Skiles is calling out readings. Altitude. Speed. They're working together with absolute precision, no wasted words. Every input matters. Every second counts. The aircraft is descending through 200 feet, then 100. The river fills the windscreen. Sullenberger pulls back gently on the side stick, raising the nose, bleeding off speed, try to achieve the impossible, a controlled landing on water in an aircraft never designed for it. The weight of responsibility in a cockpit is abstract until it becomes immediate. Sullenberger has 155 people behind him. Not statistics, not passenger manifest numbers. People. A mother traveling with her infant. Business professionals with families waiting for their phone calls tonight. Flight attendants who've worked with him before, who trust his decisions. Every input he makes on the controls now determines whether those people live or die. Chesley Burnett, Sullenberger 3, Sully, to almost everyone. Grew up in Denison, Texas. He learned to fly at 16. Joined the Air Force Academy. Became a fighter pilot, flying F-4 Phantoms. Later he flew the A-4 Skyhawk. He's been a commercial airline pilot since 1980, accumulating 19,663 total flight hours by the time Flight 1549 departs LaGuardia. But here's something interesting. Despite all those hours, despite all that experience, Sullenberger has never ditched an aircraft in water. No one he knows has. It's one of the rarest emergencies in aviation. Airlines train for it in simulators, but the scenarios usually involve ocean crossings where you have time to prepare, to run checklists, to configure the aircraft properly. This is different. They have seconds, not minutes. No time for the full ditching checklist. No time to verify every switch position. Jeffrey Skiles, sitting in the right seat, is equally experienced but newer to the A320. He logged his first flight on this aircraft type just 4 days ago, January 11th, 2009. In the hierarchy of cockpit resource management, he's there to support Sullenberger, to call out readings, to handle communications, to be a second set of eyes and hands. Some aviation analysts later debated whether Skiles' newness to the aircraft type mattered. The consensus is that it didn't. His overall experience and his ability to work seamlessly with Sullenberger were what counted. The cockpit voice recorder shows two professionals working in complete synchronization. No confusion, no conflict. They're passing through 1,000 feet now. The altimeter is unwinding rapidly. Sullenberger is hand-flying the aircraft. No autopilot, no auto-throttle, because there's no thrust to throttle. He's using every bit of the aircraft's potential energy, trading altitude for forward motion, trying to stretch the glide as far as possible. The Airbus A320 weighs approximately 150,000 pounds right now. Relatively light because they just took off and haven't burned much fuel. That's actually helpful. A heavier aircraft would have more momentum, would be harder to slow down for a survivable water impact. Sullenberger is aiming for a spot on the Hudson near Midtown Manhattan, roughly parallel to the Intrepid Sea Air and Space Museum. The river is about half a mile wide here. Plenty of room. But the challenge isn't width, it's achieving the right attitude, the right speed, the right descent rate, all simultaneously, with no engine power to make corrections. In aviation, water landings are called ditching, and the statistics are sobering. Many aircraft break apart on impact. Water is incompressible. Hit it wrong, and it's like hitting concrete. The fuselage can crack open. Wings can shear off. The aircraft can flip. Even successful ditchings often result in casualties because of the violence of the impact or because the aircraft sinks before everyone can evacuate. There are factors working in Sullenberger's favor, but he doesn't have time to consciously enumerate them. The Hudson River is calm, no significant waves. The wind is light. Visibility is excellent, and the river runs north-south here, giving him a clear landing path aligned with the water flow. But there are also factors working against him. The water temperature is approximately 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Anyone who ends up in that water has minutes before hypothermia becomes life-threatening. The aircraft is descending faster than he'd prefer, and there's no precedent, no successful commercial jet ditching in a river that he can reference, no playbook to follow. At 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 45 seconds, they're passing through 500 feet. The river is enormous in the windscreen now. Sullenberger can see boats, ferries crossing between Manhattan and New Jersey, smaller harbor craft. He's trying to avoid them while also positioning for the smoothest possible touchdown. Skiles has stopped calling out every reading. They're too low for that to matter now. He's watching, ready to assist with anything Sullenberger needs, but mostly just present, another professional consciousness in the moment. In the cabin, the flight attendants are still shouting, "Brace! Brace!" Their voices are hoarse. They've been yelling for what feels like an eternity, but has actually been less than 90 seconds. Passengers are bent forward, heads down, some praying out loud, some silent, some weeping quietly. A man named Eric Stevenson will later describe looking out the window and seeing the river so close he could see the texture of the water. Another passenger, Trip Harris, will remember thinking about his wife and children, whether they'd know he loved them, whether the last things he said to them that morning were kind. These aren't invented emotions. They're documented in later interviews, in the testimonies people gave to investigators, in the stories they shared with journalists. Real fear, real love, real human consciousness facing mortality. Sullenberger is pulling back gently on the side stick now, raising the nose. Too much and they'll stall, drop nose first. Too little and they'll hit flat and break apart. The angle has to be perfect, nose up enough to cushion the impact, but not so much that the tail hits first. The aircraft's computer systems are still functioning, running on backup power. The fly-by-wire controls are responding. This is important. Unlike older aircraft with direct mechanical linkages, the A320 translates Sullenberger's control inputs through computers that prevent certain dangerous configurations. The aircraft won't let him stall it, won't let him overbank it. In this moment, that computer assistance is the difference between possible and impossible. 200 feet. The water is rushing up. Sullenberger can see individual ripples on the surface. The New York waterway ferries are visible, moving on their normal routes, their crews not yet aware of what's about to happen above them. 100 feet. Skiles braces himself. There's nothing more to do now. No more callouts. No more procedures. Just the final seconds before impact, stretched out into a strange, timeless space where everything is both rushing forward and suspended. 50 feet. Sullenberger is holding the nose up, keeping the wings level with minute adjustments on the side stick. His feet are on the rudder pedals, making tiny corrections. Every muscle memory from 40 years of flying is active. 20 feet. The flight attendants shout one final time, "Brace!" And then the Hudson River rises up to meet them. At 3:30 and 43 seconds p.m., US Airways Flight 1549 touches the Hudson River. The entire event, from bird strike to water contact, has taken 3 minutes and 32 seconds. Sullenberger achieves something that many aviation experts later described as nearly perfect. The nose is up approximately 11 degrees. The wings are level. The descent rate is approximately 750 feet per minute at touchdown, firm but not catastrophic. The aircraft's pitch, attitude, and speed are within the narrow envelope that allows the fuselage to remain intact. The initial impact is violent. Water is incompressible, and even at the relatively controlled speed Sullenberger has managed, the forces are enormous. Passengers describe feeling like they've hit a solid surface. The deceleration is instant and severe. Overhead bins pop open. Loose items fly forward. People slam against their seatbelts. But the fuselage holds together. This is crucial. The Airbus A320 is designed with certain structural redundancies, and while it's not specifically engineered for water landings, the aluminum skin and internal frames absorb the impact forces without catastrophic failure. No major cracks appear. The wings stay attached. The tail section remains integral. The aircraft skips once, briefly becoming airborne again before settling back onto the water. This secondary impact is less severe than the first. Then the Airbus is floating, or more accurately, it's sitting on the water surface, moving forward with its remaining momentum, beginning to slow. Water immediately begins entering the fuselage. This is inevitable. Aircraft aren't boats. They're not sealed against water intrusion. The lower fuselage has openings, cargo doors, outflow valves, gaps around landing gear. Water rushes in through these penetrations, especially at the rear of the aircraft where the impact forces were greatest. The aft flight attendant, Doreen Welsh, is stationed at the rear door. She later reports that water came flooding into the cabin almost immediately, rising rapidly around her feet, then her ankles. The rear of the aircraft is taking on water faster than the front. Basic physics, as the tail sits lower in the water than the nose. In the cockpit, Sullenberger and Skiles are moving through post-impact procedures. They secure the engines, already failed, but the shutdown checklist still matters. They verify electrical systems. And then Sullenberger does something that will become part of the permanent record. He orders the evacuation. Evacuate, he says over the PA system. One word, clear and absolute. The flight attendants are already moving. They've been trained for this exact scenario, though none of them ever expected to use this training in real life. The procedure is called HUTE, Helicopter Underwater Egress Training, adapted for commercial aircraft. Open the doors. Deploy the slides, which double as rafts. Get people out. Get them onto the slides. Keep them calm. But there are complications immediately. The rear doors, where Welsh is stationed, can't be opened safely because water is already too high. Opening them would flood the cabin catastrophically. Welsh makes the instant decision to redirect passengers forward, shouting over the chaos. Move forward. Go to the forward doors. Passengers are unbuckling, standing, moving toward the exits. Some are calm. Some are panicking. A few are frozen, unable to process what's happening. The flight attendants physically guide them, sometimes pushing them, doing whatever is necessary to keep people moving. At the forward doors, left and right side, just behind the cockpit, flight attendants Donna Dent and Sheila Dale are opening the emergency exits. The doors swing outward, and the evacuation slides deploy automatically. These slides are designed to inflate in seconds, creating escape paths from the aircraft to the ground. Except there's no ground. There's water. Cold, dark, moving water. The slides inflate and sit partially on the water surface, partially propped against the aircraft fuselage. They're designed to detach and serve as rafts, but that process isn't immediate. Right now, there are emergency ramps into the Hudson River. Passengers begin sliding down. Some land on the slide rafts. Others slip directly into the water. The temperature shock is immediate. 41-degree water feels like thousands of needles against exposed skin. People gasp involuntarily, their bodies reacting to the cold before their minds can process it. One of the aircraft's overwing emergency exits is opened by a passenger. The A320 has two overwing exits, small doors above the wing surfaces that can be used in evacuations. These weren't part of the flight attendant's initial plan, but passengers trained in emergency procedures recognize them and pull the handles. The doors open, and people begin climbing out onto the wings. This turns out to be crucial. The wings provide a relatively stable platform above the water surface. They're slippery, covered in aviation fuel residue and river water, but they're solid. Dozens of passengers climb onto the wings and stand there, huddled together, as the aircraft slowly settles deeper into the river. The scene is surreal. A commercial aircraft floating in the middle of the Hudson River, its wings covered with people in business attire and winter coats, some shoeless, some clutching their belongings, all trying to comprehend what just happened. Manhattan towers on one side. New Jersey sprawls on the other. The George Washington Bridge is visible upriver, and people are standing on an airplane wing in the middle of it all. Inside the aircraft, Sullenberger and Skiles are doing a final check. This is protocol. The flight crew is the last to leave. Sullenberger walks the entire length of the cabin, looking in overhead bins, checking under seats, ensuring no one has been left behind. He finds passengers still seated, frozen in shock, and physically guides them toward the exits. The water is rising inside the cabin now. It's past ankle deep in some sections, approaching knee level at the rear. The aircraft is slowly sinking, settling nose up as the tail takes on more water. It's not going down fast, but it's definitely going down. Skiles has already exited through the forward door. He's on one of the slide rafts, helping pull people from the water. Sullenberger continues his sweep, methodical and calm despite the rising water. He checks the cockpit one final time, verifies the positions of certain switches. The cockpit voice recorder is still running, capturing every sound. Only when he's absolutely certain the aircraft is empty does Sullenberger finally exit. He's the last person off Flight 1549, stepping out onto the wing approximately 90 seconds after the initial impact. The official timeline will later show the evacuation took roughly 3 minutes from touchdown to the moment everyone was outside the aircraft. 3 minutes to get 155 people out of a sinking aircraft into 41-degree water in the middle of the Hudson River. It's an almost incomprehensible achievement, and it's only half of what needs to happen for everyone to survive. Now they need rescue, because exposure to this water will kill them, just more slowly than the impact would have. The rescue begins before anyone officially coordinates it. This is one of the remarkable aspects of what happens next. There's no central command directing boats to the scene, no orchestrated response plan. It's spontaneous, organic. People see an aircraft in the river and simply react. The first vessels to arrive are the New York waterway ferries. These are commuter ferries, running regular routes between Manhattan and New Jersey. They carry thousands of passengers daily, crossing the Hudson on schedules measured in minutes. Their captains and crews are experienced mariners, familiar with the river's currents, weather patterns, and traffic. The ferry Thomas Jefferson is approximately 200 yards away when Flight 1549 touches down. Captain Vince Lombardi, no relation to the football coach, sees the aircraft descending and initially thinks it's going to crash into the ferry terminal. Then he realizes it's heading for the water. He immediately turns his vessel toward the impact point, calling to his deckhand to prepare for survivors. The Thomas Jefferson arrives within minutes. Lombardi maneuvers the ferry alongside the aircraft's wing, where passengers are standing in soaking clothes, shivering violently in the January cold. The ferry sits higher in the water than the wing, but it's close enough. Crew members reach down, grabbing hands, pulling people up onto the ferry deck. Other ferries arrive in rapid succession. The Moira Smith, named after the only female NYPD officer killed on September 11, 2001, approaches from the north. The Yogi Berra, named after the Yankees catcher, comes from the south. The Governor Thomas H. Keane joins the cluster. Within 10 minutes, there are 5 or 6 ferries surrounding the downed aircraft, their crews working frantically to pull people from the wings and water. The ferry crews aren't trained rescue personnel. They're ordinary maritime workers, deckhands, engineers, captains, suddenly thrust into an emergency. But they act with remarkable efficiency. They form human chains, passing survivors hand to hand from the water level to the ferry decks. They distribute blankets, coats, anything to combat the hypothermia setting in. Some passengers are still in the water, clinging to the partially deflated slide rafts or floating in life vests. The 41-degree water is lethal. Human bodies lose heat 25 times faster in water than in air. Immersion in water this cold can cause cardiac arrest within minutes. Hypothermia, the dangerous lowering of core body temperature, begins almost immediately. A man named Steve O'Brien, a passenger who ended up in the water, will later describe the cold as beyond anything he'd experienced. Not just uncomfortable, actively painful, like his entire body was being stabbed. His muscles began to seize. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He knew, cognitively, that he needed to swim toward a ferry, but his body wasn't responding efficiently. Ferry crews throw life rings, extend boat hooks. Some crew members actually enter the water themselves, a risky decision given the cold, but necessary. One deckhand, Brittany Catanzaro, pulls multiple passengers onto the Thomas Jefferson, working until her arms ache from the effort of hauling waterlogged adults up the ferry side. The NYPD harbor units arrive next. These are specialized police boats designed for marine response. They're faster and more maneuverable than the ferries, able to navigate close to the sinking aircraft. Police divers trained in cold water rescue begin pulling people from the river, prioritizing those who appear weakest or most at risk. Coast Guard vessels arrive shortly after. The Coast Guard maintains a station on the Hudson and responds to maritime emergencies regularly, but they've never responded to a commercial jet ditching. Their boats join the cluster, adding to the improvised Rescue Armada. The official count will later show that approximately 14 vessels participated in the rescue. Ferries, police boats, Coast Guard craft, and a few privately owned boats whose operators simply saw people in trouble and responded. No one coordinated this. No one assigned sectors or delegated responsibilities. It just happened, driven by the fundamental human instinct to help. On the aircraft itself, the situation is deteriorating. The fuselage is settling lower in the water. The tail section is almost completely submerged now. Water has filled the rear of the cabin and is advancing forward. The aircraft isn't going to sink catastrophically, but it's definitely going down. Flight attendant Doreen Welsh is one of the last crew members still on the aircraft. She's helping guide passengers who are frozen with shock or confused about where to go. At one point, she's standing in waist-deep water inside the cabin, physically pushing people toward the forward exits. The water is so cold it's numbing, but she keeps working. Sullenberger, true to protocol, remains on the aircraft until the final check is complete. After walking the cabin twice to ensure no one is trapped or unconscious under seats, he finally steps onto the wing. He's immediately struck by the cold. The temperature contrast between the cabin and the outside air. Passengers on the wing are huddled together, some literally holding each other for warmth. A police boat pulls alongside. Officers reach up, helping people down from the wing into the boat. The transfer is awkward. The wing is slippery. The boat is rocking slightly in the current, and people are shaking from cold and adrenaline. But it works. One by one, passengers descend from the wing into the boats. Sullenberger is the absolute last person off the aircraft. Official timelines put this at approximately 3:33 p.m., roughly 3 minutes after touchdown. He steps onto a police boat, and only then, finally, does he allow himself to feel the full weight of what just happened. Behind him, Flight 1549 continues its slow settling into the Hudson. The wings are still above water, but the fuselage is deeper. Water is pouring into the cabin through every opening. The aircraft will eventually sink to the point where only portions of the wings and the upper fuselage are visible, requiring a massive salvage operation in the days to come. But right now, in this moment, everyone is off. Everyone is alive. All 155 people who were aboard when the aircraft struck birds at 2,800 feet over the Bronx are now on boats, wrapped in blankets, shivering violently but breathing. The ferries turn toward the nearest piers. The police boats radio ahead to hospitals. Ambulances are already staging at various Manhattan waterfront locations. The first survivors will reach dry land within minutes of leaving the aircraft. The entire event, from bird strike to last person rescued, has taken approximately 6 minutes. 6 minutes that will be analyzed, documented, discussed, and studied for years. 6 minutes that changed aviation safety protocols. 6 minutes that proved against enormous odds that sometimes everyone makes it out alive. The ferries dock at piers along the west side of Manhattan and in Weehawken, New Jersey. Ambulances are waiting, their lights flashing silently in the winter afternoon. Paramedics move quickly, triaging survivors, wrapping them in additional blankets, assessing who needs immediate hospital transport and who can be treated on scene. The remarkable thing, the statistically improbable thing, is that there are no fatalities. Not one. Out of 155 people who experienced a dual-engine failure, an unpowered glide over one of the world's most densely populated cities, a water landing, an immersion in near-freezing water, every single person survives. Their injuries, certainly. The NTSB's final report will document them in detail. 78 people suffer some form of injury during the evacuation and rescue. Most are minor, bruises, lacerations, minor fractures from the impact forces or from scrambling over seats and through emergency exits. 5 people sustained serious injuries. Flight attendant Doreen Welsh suffers a deep laceration to her leg from wreckage inside the flooded cabin. A passenger breaks several ribs during the initial impact. Another passenger suffers a severe cervical spine injury that will require surgery. These are significant medical events, life-altering for the individuals involved, but they're survivable. The most serious medical concern is hypothermia. Nearly everyone who entered the water is showing signs: violent shivering, confusion, slurred speech, loss of fine motor control. Hospital emergency rooms across Manhattan and New Jersey receive dozens of survivors over the next hour, prioritizing those with the lowest core body temperatures. One passenger, a man in his 50s, is found to have a core temperature of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, below the threshold for mild hypothermia. He's shaking so violently he can barely speak. Medical staff wrap him in warming blankets, administer heated 4 fluids, monitor his cardiac rhythm. Within hours, he stabilizes. Within days, he's released. The hospitals handle the influx with remarkable efficiency. This is New York, a city whose medical infrastructure is accustomed to mass casualty events, though not usually from aviation accidents in the middle of the river. Trauma teams activate. Social workers arrive to help survivors contact families. The Red Cross sets up support stations. Meanwhile, back on the Hudson, the aircraft continues its slow settling. By 4 p.m., only the upper portion of the fuselage and the wings remain above water. The tail is completely submerged. The nose is tilted up at an angle, giving the entire scene a surreal quality, like a partially submerged monument. Salvage operations begin planning immediately. The aircraft is a hazard to navigation. It's leaking fuel. Jet fuel creates a visible sheen on the water surface, though fortunately there's no fire. The Hudson River has current, and there's concern the aircraft could shift, break apart further, or sink completely. The National Transportation Safety Board sends investigators to the scene within hours. This is standard procedure for any aviation accident, but the speed and scale of the response reflects the extraordinary nature of what happened. A successful ditching of a commercial jet in a river with 0 fatalities is essentially unprecedented in modern aviation history. The NTSB will eventually assign dozens of investigators to the case, examining everything: the bird strike, the engines, the flight crew's decisions, the evacuation procedures, the survivability factors, the rescue response. They'll interview every passenger, every crew member, every ferry captain. They'll analyze the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, both of which survived intact and provided crucial evidence. But in the immediate aftermath, the focus is simply on accounting for everyone and ensuring they receive appropriate care. The airline establishes a family assistance center. Survivors are provided with phones to call loved ones. Many of them lost everything: wallets, phones, laptops, luggage in the evacuation. The airline arranges temporary accommodations, replacement clothing, and transportation. Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Skiles are among the last to leave the scene. They're taken to a nearby hospital for examination, standard procedure after any accident. Both are physically unharmed, though exhausted. Sullenberger gives a brief statement to investigators, providing the initial facts of what happened, though the full debriefing will take days. The media descends on the story almost immediately. News helicopters circle overhead, capturing aerial footage of the partially submerged aircraft. Camera crews stake out the hospitals and piers. Survivors, wrapped in blankets and still shaking from cold, are interviewed as they emerge from ambulances. The story goes global within hours. "Miracle on the Hudson" becomes the shorthand phrase, a term that will stick, though it somewhat obscures the skill and training that made survival possible. It wasn't just luck. It was Sullenberger's decades of experience, Skiles' support, the flight attendants' training, the design safety features of the A320, the quick response of the ferry crews, and yes, a certain amount of favorable circumstance. But calling it a miracle isn't entirely wrong. The statistical probability of everything aligning correctly, the calm water, the available rescue vessels, the aircraft holding together, the quick evacuation, approaches the infinitesimal. Aviation experts running simulations in the following weeks will find that changing almost any single variable leads to casualties. If the bird strike had occurred 30 seconds earlier or later, they would have been over dense urban areas with no water landing option. If the Hudson had been choppy, the aircraft likely would have broken apart on impact. If the ferries hadn't been in exactly the right locations, hypothermia deaths were probable. If Sullenberger had chosen Teterboro and fallen short, the aircraft would have come down in residential New Jersey. The convergence of factors necessary for total survival was extraordinarily narrow. That's what makes January 15th, 2009 remarkable. Not just that everyone lived, but that they lived despite how many ways it could have gone catastrophically wrong. By nightfall, all 155 survivors are accounted for. Most have been released from hospitals or are being held for observation. A few will remain hospitalized for days due to their injuries, but even they are stable, improving. The aircraft remains in the river, a ghostly presence illuminated by spotlights as salvage crews work through the night to stabilize it. It will eventually be recovered, transported to a secure facility in New Jersey, and methodically disassembled as part of the investigation. Years later, portions of the fuselage will be displayed at the Carolinas Aviation Museum in Charlotte, serving as a permanent reminder of what happened. But tonight, in the immediate aftermath, the focus is simply on the astonishing fact that everyone survived. Against odds that seemed impossible during those terrifying 3.5 minutes, 155 people are alive, breathing, reunited with their families, or on their way to being so. The river flows on, dark and cold, indifferent to the human drama it briefly hosted. The investigation begins in earnest the following morning. NTSB teams arrive at the salvage site on the Hudson, at the hospitals where survivors are recovering, and at US Airways facilities where maintenance records are stored. They bring years of specialized training in accident reconstruction, engineering analysis, and human factors research. The first priority is recovering the aircraft itself. This isn't a simple operation. The Airbus A320 weighs approximately 150,000 pounds fully loaded, though much of the fuel has leaked out by now. It's sitting in roughly 50 feet of water, partially submerged, resting on the river bottom at an angle. The current is moderate but constant. Winter conditions make the work challenging. Divers must operate in near-freezing water wearing dry suits. Specialized salvage barges are positioned around the aircraft. Heavy-lift cranes are brought in. Divers attach cables and straps to structural hardpoints on the fuselage. The operation requires days of preparation. Every movement must be calculated to prevent the aircraft from breaking apart further or slipping into deeper water. On January 17th, 2 days after the ditching, the aircraft is lifted from Hudson. Cranes raise it slowly, water pouring from every opening. The fuselage emerges intact, battered, waterlogged, but structurally whole. This confirms what investigators suspected. The ditching itself was executed within the narrow parameters that allow survival. The aircraft is transported by barge to a secure facility in Kearney, New Jersey. There, in a large hangar, investigators begin the meticulous process of documentation and disassembly. Every panel is photographed. Every component is cataloged. The goal is to understand exactly what happened and why everyone survived. The engines are of particular interest. Both CFM56 turbofans are recovered separately and transported to specialized facilities for teardown analysis. What investigators find confirms the bird strike scenario, but provides new details about the severity. Both engines show evidence of multiple bird ingestions. Organic material, later identified through DNA analysis as Canada goose, is found throughout the compressor sections. The fan blades show impact damage. In the left engine, several fan blades are fractured completely. The right engine has similar damage, though slightly less severe. The NTSB determines that the bird strike was catastrophic and unrecoverable. Even if Sullenberger and Skiles had executed every restart procedure perfectly, which they did attempt in the limited time available, the engines were too damaged to produce thrust. This finding is important. It means the ditching wasn't the result of pilot error or failure to follow procedures. It was genuinely unavoidable. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, the so-called black boxes, though they're actually bright orange, provide extraordinary detail about the crew's actions. Every word spoken between Sullenberger and Skiles is captured. Every control input is recorded. Every altitude change, every heading adjustment, every system activation. What the recordings reveal is a crew working with remarkable precision under extreme pressure. There's no panic in the voices, no arguments about what to do. Sullenberger makes decisions quickly and communicates them clearly. Skiles responds immediately and appropriately. Their coordination is textbook, exactly what decades of training and experience are supposed to produce. One detail from the cockpit voice recorder becomes widely discussed: the brevity of communications. When Sullenberger tells air traffic control, "We're going to be in the Hudson," he doesn't elaborate. He doesn't explain his reasoning or ask for opinions. He states a fact and moves on to flying the aircraft. This economy of communication, saying only what's necessary, is a hallmark of expert performance under pressure. The NTSB also examines the evacuation procedures extensively. They interview all 3 flight attendants. The picture that emerges is of professionals executing their training almost perfectly despite conditions that were far from ideal. Doreen Welsh's decision to redirect passengers away from the flooding rear doors likely prevented deaths. If those doors had been opened with water already high outside, the cabin would have flooded catastrophically, possibly trapping passengers or overwhelming the forward exits. The passengers' use of the overwing exits, though not initially directed by flight attendants, turned out to be crucial. It distributed the evacuation load across multiple exits and provided the wing platform that kept dozens of people out of the water while rescue boats arrived. Investigators note several factors that contributed to the successful evacuation. The aircraft remained relatively level after touchdown, which kept the cabin aisles passable. The electrical system continued functioning on backup power, providing emergency lighting. The evacuation slides deployed properly despite the water landing. And critically, the cabin didn't fill with smoke or fire, which are the primary killers in most fatal aviation accidents. The ferry response receives particular attention. The NTSB interviews every ferry captain and crew member involved. What emerges is a picture of spontaneous coordination, people making individual decisions that collectively created an effective rescue operation. Captain Vince Lombardi of the Thomas Jefferson describes seeing the aircraft descend and making the instant decision to divert from his scheduled route. Other ferry captains made similar decisions independently. No one called a central dispatch. No one waited for instructions. They simply responded to an obvious emergency. This spontaneous response was possible because the ferries were in exactly the right locations, a matter of timing and normal traffic patterns. The ferry captains had clear visual sight of the ditching and could respond immediately. The Hudson River is a relatively confined waterway where multiple vessels could converge quickly. Weather conditions also receive analysis. January 15, 2009 was cold but clear. Winds were light, less than 10 knots. Visibility was excellent, 10 miles or more. The Hudson River surface was calm, with wave heights less than 1 foot. These conditions were nearly optimal for a water landing. In the months following, the NTSB will issue recommendations for improved bird strike prevention at airports, enhanced ditching training, and better emergency coordination. But in these immediate weeks, the investigation focuses on documentation, preserving evidence, recording testimony while memories are fresh. The aircraft itself, disassembled in the New Jersey hangar, becomes a three-dimensional textbook in survival factors. Every scratch, every dent, every water stain tells part of the story of January 15, 2009. The statistical improbability of what happened on January 15, 2009 becomes clearer the more you examine the numbers. Aviation experts analyzing the event identify dozens of critical variables, each of which had to fall within a narrow, acceptable range for survival to be possible. Consider the altitude at which the bird strike occurred. At 2,800 feet, Flight 1549 had just enough height to glide to the Hudson River. If the birds had been encountered at 1,500 feet, entirely plausible, as Canada geese regularly fly at that altitude, the glide distance would have been insufficient. The aircraft would have come down in the Bronx, likely with catastrophic results. Conversely, if the strike had occurred at 5,000 feet, Sullenberger might have had enough altitude to attempt a return to LaGuardia or make it to Teterboro. The NTSB's computer models suggest that with another 2,000 feet of starting altitude, reaching a runway becomes mathematically possible, though still extremely challenging. The specific altitude of 2,800 feet created what aviation analysts call a forced optimal choice, high enough to reach the river, but not high enough to reach anything else. It eliminated all options except the one that proved survivable. The time of day matters enormously. At 3:27 p.m. on a Thursday, the Hudson River had multiple ferries in active service. The commuter traffic between Manhattan and New Jersey peaks in late afternoon. If Flight 1549 had departed at 7 a.m. or 11 p.m., ferry traffic would have been significantly lighter. Response times would have been longer. More passengers would have remained in the frigid water for extended periods. The NTSB estimates that each additional minute of cold water immersion would have increased the probability of hypothermia-related deaths by approximately 15%. The fact that ferries arrived within 2 to 3 minutes of the ditching was critical. That timing wasn't skill or planning, it was pure circumstance. The day of the week also mattered. Thursday is a heavy travel day. More ferries are scheduled. More Harbor Patrol units are on duty. More medical resources are positioned throughout the city in anticipation of normal weekday activity. If the accident had occurred on a Sunday morning, the rescue infrastructure would have been substantially thinner. Weather conditions were, as mentioned earlier, nearly optimal. But it's worth emphasizing how narrow that window was. The National Weather Service data for January 15, 2009 shows winds at LaGuardia were 7 knots, light enough to not significantly affect the glide or the landing. 2 days later, on January 17th, winds were gusting to 25 knots. In those conditions, the same ditching would likely have resulted in the aircraft cartwheeling on impact. The Hudson River itself cooperates in subtle ways. The tidal current on January 15th at 3:30 p.m. was relatively slack, the period between tidal flows when water movement is minimal. During peak tidal flow, the Hudson can have currents exceeding 2 knots, which would have made the landing approach more difficult and could have caused the aircraft to drift more rapidly after touchdown, complicating rescue operations. Water temperature, while dangerously cold at 41 degrees, was actually warmer than it could have been. January water temperatures in the Hudson can drop to the mid-30s in particularly cold winters. Every degree matters when calculating survival time in water. At 35 degrees, the onset of severe hypothermia would have been measurably faster. The aircraft's weight at the time of the ditching was another factor that happened to fall in the optimal range. Having just departed, the fuel tanks were nearly full, giving the aircraft a total weight of approximately 150,000 pounds. If they'd been 3 hours into the flight, having burned off fuel, the aircraft would have been lighter, which sounds beneficial, but actually isn't for a water landing. A lighter aircraft has less momentum and can be more susceptible to wave action and instability on impact. The specific weight of Flight 1549 at ditching provided enough mass for a stable landing, while not being so heavy that the impact forces would have exceeded structural limits. The aircraft type itself matters. The Airbus A320 has several design features that contributed to survival. Its fly-by-wire flight control system prevented Sullenberger from inadvertently putting the aircraft into an unrecoverable configuration during the descent. The sidestick controllers gave him precise control, even at low speeds. The wing design provided a relatively favorable glide ratio. But perhaps most importantly, the A320's fuselage structure proved robust enough to withstand a water landing. Not all aircraft would have remained intact under similar conditions. Older designs with different structural philosophies might have broken apart. Even passenger behavior played a role in the outcome. Despite the terror of the situation, there was no mass panic that overwhelmed the evacuation. People followed instructions. They moved when told to move. They helped each other. Several passengers later reported assisting elderly or disabled fellow travelers, ensuring no one was left behind. This cooperative behavior isn't guaranteed in emergencies. The NTSB has documented accidents where panic led to bottlenecks at exits, where people trampled each other, where the evacuation devolved into chaos that cost lives. On Flight 1549, that didn't happen. Psychologists studying the event suggest several factors that contributed to the relatively orderly evacuation. The flight attendants' training and clear commands provided structure. The impact, while violent, wasn't violent enough to cause widespread incapacitation. And perhaps most significantly, people could see they were on water, not in a fire, which may have reduced the immediate terror that drives panic. All of these factors, altitude, timing, weather, weight, aircraft design, crew performance, passenger behavior, rescue proximity, had to align correctly. Change any single variable significantly, and the outcome changes. This is why aviation experts resist calling it simply a miracle. Yes, there was an element of fortune in how the variables aligned. But there was also extraordinary skill, robust engineering, effective training, and, perhaps underestimated, the fundamental decency of strangers who risked their own safety to help people they'd never met. The ferry crews weren't required to respond. They chose to. The police harbor units weren't responding to a declared emergency initially. They responded because they saw people in trouble. The passengers who helped each other evacuate weren't following regulations. They were following basic human instinct. January 15th, 2009 was a convergence of statistical improbability and human competence. Neither element alone would have been sufficient. Together, they produced an outcome that remains, even years later, almost unprecedented in aviation history. Every single person walked away. That sentence still feels impossible when you examine what could have gone wrong. The cockpit voice recorder captured 208 seconds from a moment of the bird strike until the aircraft touched water. Those 208 seconds contain some of the most analyzed audio in aviation history. Every word, every tone, every pause has been studied by experts trying to understand how two pilots managed an impossible situation. The recording begins at 3:27 and 11 seconds p.m. with a sudden thump, the sound of birds striking the aircraft. Then a change in the ambient engine noise, audible even through the cockpit microphones. The smooth roar becomes rougher, inconsistent. Within 2 seconds, both pilots recognize what's happening. Sullenberger's first words after the strike are calm, almost conversational, birds. Then, for seconds later, more urgently but still controlled, we got one roll, both of them rolling back. He's describing the engines spooling down, losing power. The word choice is technical, precise. There's no profanity, no exclamation, just information. Skiles responds immediately. Ignition, start. He's already reaching for the engine restart procedures, trying to get at least one engine producing thrust again. This is the correct response. When engines fail, you attempt to restart them. But even as he's doing this, both pilots likely understand the situation is beyond recovery. At 3 hours, 27 minutes, and 15 seconds, Sullenberger radios LaGuardia approach control. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds, we've lost thrust in both engines. We're turning back towards LaGuardia. The use of Mayday, the International Aviation Distress Call, immediately alerts air traffic control that this is a life-threatening emergency. Air traffic controller Patrick Harton responds within 2 seconds. Okay, yeah. You need to return to LaGuardia? Turn left heading of a 220. He's trying to help, offering a heading that will point them back toward the airport. But Harton can see on his radar scope that the aircraft is descending rapidly, much faster than a normal approach. The cockpit voice recorder captures Sullenberger and Skiles running through emergency procedures. Their voices overlap occasionally as they work through checklists, but there's no confusion. They're coordinating perfectly, each knowing their role. Skiles handles radio communications and attempts the engine restart procedures. Sullenberger focuses entirely on flying the aircraft, managing the descent, choosing a landing site. At 3 hours, 27 minutes, and 24 seconds, Harton offers, Cactus 1529, if we can get it to you. Do you want to try to land runway 13? He's cleared the runway, moved other traffic out of the way. LaGuardia is ready for them. Sullenberger's response is immediate and definitive. We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson. The phrasing is significant. We're unable, not we'll try, or we're not sure. He's already calculated in his head that LaGuardia is impossible. The altitude and distance don't work. He's already moving to the next option. There's a brief discussion about Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Harton coordinates with Teterboro controllers, getting runway 1 cleared for an emergency landing. At 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 5 seconds, he tells Sullenberger, Cactus 1529, turn right 280, you can land runway 1 at Teterboro. Sullenberger acknowledges, we can't do it. Then, 3 seconds later, we're going to be in the Hudson. His voice remains calm. Matter of fact, he's not asking permission or seeking confirmation. He's stating a decision that's already made. This moment, the decision to ditch in the Hudson rather than attempt to reach any airport, is the critical juncture. Sullenberger has performed a calculation that normally takes pilots several minutes using computers and charts. He's done it in his head in seconds, while hand-flying a powerless aircraft descending over New York City. Air traffic control expert analyses later confirm his judgment was correct. Computer flight path models constructed after the accident show that attempting to reach LaGuardia or Teterboro would have resulted in the aircraft crashing short of the runways, likely in populated areas. But in the moment, Sullenberger can't run computer models. He has only his experience, his intuition, and his understanding of the aircraft's performance. The fact that his instant assessment matched what careful post-accident analysis would later prove is a testament to expertise developed over decades. Inside the cockpit, the pilots continue working. At 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 10 seconds, less than 60 seconds from water impact, Sullenberger makes a PA announcement. This is the captain. Brace for impact. 23 syllables that tell passengers everything they need to know. In the background of the cockpit voice recorder, you can hear the ground proximity warning system, an automated voice that warns pilots when they're too close to terrain or water. Pull up, pull up, pull up. The mechanical voice repeats insistently. The pilots ignore it. They're not avoiding the water. They're aiming for it. Skiles calls out airspeeds and altitudes as they descend through the final 1,000 feet. 250 knots. Then 220. Then simply altitude callouts, 1,000 feet, 500, 200. At 3 hours, 28 minutes, and 45 seconds, 15 seconds before impact, Sullenberger says, "Got any ideas?" It's almost a joke, a moment of dark humor between professionals who both know there are no more ideas. They're committed. Skiles doesn't answer. There's nothing to say. The final seconds of the recording capture Sullenberger's inputs on the flight controls. Small movements, precise adjustments. He's raising the nose gradually, trying to achieve the perfect touchdown attitude. Too steep, and they'll stall and drop. Too shallow, and they'll skip violently or cartwheel. At 3 hours, 30 minutes, and 43 seconds, the cockpit voice recorder captures the impact. A tremendous roar of water and metal, loud enough to saturate the microphones. Then almost immediately, relative quiet. The aircraft is floating. The cockpit is intact. Both pilots are conscious and functional. Sullenberger's first post-impact words are calm and procedural. Evacuate. He's initiating the emergency evacuation. Then, more specifically to Skiles, get out. He wants his first officer exiting while he performs the final cabin check. The recording continues for another minute as Sullenberger walks the cabin, but there's little meaningful audio, mostly ambient sounds of water, movement, distant voices. The final recorded sound is Sullenberger exiting the aircraft at approximately 3:33 p.m., 5 minutes and 32 seconds after the bird strike. Those 208 seconds between bird strike and touchdown are now studied in aviation training programs worldwide. They represent expert performance under conditions of extreme stress and time pressure. No panic, no freezing, just continuous problem-solving and decision-making until the outcome is determined. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report includes extensive analysis of the cockpit voice recorder transcript. Their conclusion emphasizes that the crew's performance was exceptional and that the decisions made were correct and timely. But those adjectives feel insufficient when describing men who saved 155 lives through skill and judgment alone. The aftermath of January 15, 2009 ripples outward in ways both visible and invisible. Captain Sullenberger becomes, almost overnight, an international figure. His calm competence, his adherence to protocol, his final walk through the cabin. These actions resonate beyond aviation. He represents something people want to believe about expertise, about doing your job well when it matters most. But Sullenberger himself struggles with the sudden fame. He's a private person by nature, someone who flew commercial aircraft for 29 years without seeking attention. Now he's invited to the Super Bowl, interviewed on national television, asked to speak at events. The attention is uncomfortable, though he handles it with the same quiet professionalism he showed in the cockpit. The crew members, Skiles, Dent, Welsh, and Dale, also experienced the strange dislocation of sudden recognition. They were doing their jobs, following their training, and suddenly the world wants to hear their stories. Some embrace it, others retreat. All of them carry the weight of that day differently. For passengers, the aftermath varies enormously. Some experience post-traumatic stress, nightmares, anxiety about flying, intrusive memories of the cold water. Others report feeling strangely grateful, as though they've been given a second chance at life. Several passengers stay in touch with each other, forming bonds based on shared experience. They gather annually to commemorate the date, to remember what happened and that they survived it. Aviation changes in subtle but significant ways. The Federal Aviation Administration issues new guidelines for bird strike prevention near airports. LaGuardia and other urban airports intensify their wildlife management programs, using everything from trained falcons to habitat modification to reduce bird populations near flight paths. Training protocols evolve. Airlines add more realistic ditching scenarios to simulator training. Pilots practice the specific decision-making process Sullenberger faced. How to assess whether you have enough altitude to reach a runway. How to identify suitable forced landing sites. How to communicate decisions quickly under pressure. The phrase, "the miracle on the Hudson," enters the cultural vocabulary. It becomes shorthand for unlikely survival, for expert performance, for ordinary people rising to extraordinary circumstances. Books are written. A film is produced years later. The event becomes mythologized, which brings its own complications, separating what actually happened from how people remember or imagine it happened. The NTSB's final report runs to hundreds of pages. It contains detailed findings about the bird strike, the engines, the ditching, the evacuation, and the rescue. The report makes dozens of recommendations. Most are technical: changes to engine certification standards, improvements to aircraft ditching characteristics, enhanced emergency equipment. But some recommendations address human factors. How to better train crews for rapid decision-making. How to improve communication between cockpit and cabin during emergencies. How to design evacuation procedures that work when aircraft are in water rather than on land. Not all recommendations are implemented immediately. Aviation is a conservative industry, resistant to change without overwhelming evidence. But over the years, many of the NTSB's suggestions find their way into regulations and training programs. The aircraft itself, US Airways Flight 1549, registration N106 US, is eventually recovered from the salvage facility and partially restored. Sections of the fuselage are displayed at the Carolinas Aviation Museum in Charlotte. Visitors can see the actual aircraft that landed in the Hudson, can stand near the emergency exits, can look at the wings where passengers stood waiting for rescue. There's something powerful about seeing the physical artifact. The damage is visible: dents in the fuselage, scratches on the wings, water stains throughout the cabin. But the structure is intact. It held together when it mattered. Standing near it, you can almost feel the weight of what happened, the narrow margin between disaster and survival. 10 years after the event, in 2019, survivors gather for a reunion. They're older now. The immediate trauma has faded for most, replaced by something more complex: a deep appreciation for life, an awareness of mortality, a recognition of how fragile everything is. They hug each other, these strangers who shared 5 minutes of terror. They tell stories, laugh, sometimes cry. Sullenberger attends these gatherings when he can. He's retired from flying now, working as a safety consultant and advocate. He still deflects praise, still insists he was just doing what he was trained to do. But the passengers don't see it that way. To them, he's the reason they're alive, to attend reunions, to watch their children grow up, to see another decade unfold. The broader lesson of January 15th, 2009 isn't about heroism exactly. It's about competence, about the value of experience and training, about systems designed with multiple redundancies. about strangers helping strangers without being asked, about how, sometimes, when every variable aligns correctly and people do their jobs well, impossible outcomes become possible. Aviation remains statistically the safest form of transportation, and Flight 1549 paradoxically reinforces that. Even in catastrophic failure, dual engine loss over a major city, the combination of skilled crew, robust design, and spontaneous rescue can produce survival. That's not luck. That's engineering and training and human cooperation working together. But it's also fragile. Change the altitude by 1,000 feet. Change the time of day by 3 hours. Change the weather to 20-knot winds. Any of these variations and people die. The margin is vanishingly thin. We like to think we control outcomes, that skill and preparation are sufficient. Flight 1549 reminds us that sometimes they're necessary, but not sufficient. Sometimes you also need the river to be calm, and the ferries to be close, and the water to be just warm enough. The Hudson River continues to flow, dark and cold, between Manhattan and New Jersey. Ferry boats cross it thousands of times each year, carrying passengers who barely notice the water below. The flight path out of LaGuardia passes over it regularly, aircraft climbing through the same airspace where Flight 1549 encountered birds on a winter afternoon. For most people, January 15th, 2009 fades into history. Another story of disaster averted, filed away with other memorable events. But for 155 people, it remains vivid. The sound of the impact, the cold of the water, the faces of strangers reaching down to pull them onto ferry decks, the impossible relief of survival. They carry it with them, these survivors, not as trauma, necessarily, but as knowledge. Life is fragile. Expertise matters. Strangers can be kind. Sometimes, against all odds, everyone makes it home. The river flows on. The aircraft sits in a museum. The story becomes history, studied and analyzed and remembered. And somewhere right now, a pilot is climbing through 2,800 feet over a city, monitoring instruments, following procedures, carrying passengers who trust that if something goes wrong, training and skill will be enough. Usually it is. On January 15th, 2009 it was. Sweet dreams.